Yo, Taylor Swift sold 500,000 copies of her latest album, Folklore, in 3 days. 500,000 albums sold in 3 days. Holy shit. That's not even the craziest part. I mean, that is insane. But apparently 400,000 of those were pure album sales. So just like her website or iTunes, like actually like clicking to like physically buy the actual album. 400,000 of those. That's insane. The rest are just streaming, but what a fucking animal, man. Jesus, I don't know who else today can do something like that, honestly. And that's three again. This is 3 days. That's something I don't even know. Those first week numbers are gonna be absolutely absurd, absolutely absurd. But hey, if you want to check out me and my girlfriend Sarah talk about that album, go check Mondays/Tuesdays episode of the podcast. But before I get started with the regularly scheduled program for today, I want to apologize to all my JPEG Mafia fans out there because somehow he released 2 new songs over the past 2 weeks that just completely flew underneath my radar. But I wanted to shout them out because they're great and I like JPEG Mafia a lot. For anyone who doesn't know or is unfamiliar with JPEG Mafia, he's an experimental rap artist who has made a name for himself due to his stellar rapping skills, very unorthodox instrumentals, and top tier penmanship. And he has like a lot of like tongue in cheek, kind of darker humor and takes on music. But again, his name is JPEG Mafia, so JPEGMAFIA, and that's all just one word. The 2 songs that he released are called Living Single and Rough 7. I'm not going to say too much. I'm not really going to explain too much about these songs on this episode because that's not what this episode is about. But, and also, they really kind of fall under music that you kind of just have to listen to understand it. You can't really listen to someone talk about it, especially me, and fully understand it. But he's an insanely good artist, and these 2 songs are great examples of his artistry, so go check those out. Okay, so welcome back to another installment of the Hate Train. This is where you cue the air horn. I'm going to have an air horn eventually, but today we'll be talking about the insanely popular band Maroon 5. I don't think anyone doesn't know who Maroon 5 is, but, hopefully I'll go over a little bit of their discography, similar to what I did with Nicki Minaj, but not nearly as in depth, just to keep this podcast at a shorter duration. But again, I feel the need to preface this episode by saying that I don't hate Maroon 5 as much as I hate their shift in the sound of their music. And like I said before, also I won't really be talking about their entire discography because they do have a relatively lengthy discography, but I will be talking about 3 of their albums since that's really all I need to talk about to demonstrate my point. And I also want to take this episode to focus on the difference between making songs that get played on the radio or are good enough to be played on the radio, and the difference between those kinds of songs and then songs that are made specifically for the radio. And by radio, whenever I say like songs made for radio, what I really mean by that is the songs were made for mass consumption. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. Maroon 5, pop punk band, rock band, turned into what I would call a pandering pop radio icon of a band. Everybody knows who they are, generally speaking, and I was like, everyone knows who they are, and it's at some point they've reluctantly sang along to moves like Jagger in their car with their mom on the way home from the supermarket or something like that. But they're big for a reason. They're the definition of a household name, and it's weird now because if you were to ask someone who's never heard Maroon 5 or has only ever heard like their music in the past few years, I would feel like they would kind of classify their music as pop music. Whereas that's not how they started. They started, again, like I said, as a punk rock band or like an alt rock band who kind of waded into the like kind of soul/R&B sound every once in a while, but they originated as a pop/punk rock band. And actually, before they were known as Maroon 5, they were their band was called Kara's Flowers, spelled Kara. And they were actually picked up and immediately dropped by the record label in 1997, which was the year I was born, which I didn't even know that they existed as a collective all the way back then in 1997. And even like looking back, their first album, which I'll talk about next, called Songs About Jane, was released in 2002. Like, it's an 18-year-old album, and I'll talk about it. I still really like that album. But for some reason, I thought it's weird that they've been out for longer, more than 20 years, and they're still putting out, I'll say, popular music. But okay, so we're gonna throw it back to 2002 to start, and this was when Maroon 5 was rebranded as Maroon 5, being a more, I'll say, popular, more mainstream-oriented punk rock band, excuse me. And this was when they released their debut album called Songs About Jane, which to this day I still think is a fantastic album. I've listened to it every once in a while, just when, like, I need a change of pace in the music, in like just newer music that I'm listening to, and it still holds up well. Again, it's 18. The album is 18 years old, and it's still. I mean, it does sound somewhat dated. The sound or the mixing sounds a little bit dated, but I mean, in terms of quality, it still holds up with the best one. If you forgot about this album, hopefully songs such as This Love and She Will Be Loved should jog your memory. I'm not going to sing them for you, but She Will Be Loved is probably the most popular song that I can imagine that would really refer back to this album. Since this debut album, it is meant, since this is their debut album, it is meant to demonstrate like the sounds and the skills of the group, as most debut albums kind of take a similar approach to that, and I think it does so very, very well. Again, Maroon 5 was originally introduced as a punk rock band that also took influences from pop, and there was a lot of like funk in a lot of their earlier stuff, and there's very, very, very small hints of it in some of their newer stuff, but at the beginning it was just like punk rock. Excuse me. And that sound is very clear throughout this entire album. It's insanely groovy, and at times has the attitude of a punk rock band just kind of sprinkled all over the place. Like, it still has that attitude while still kind of having just like the more welcoming sound of like a groovy funk song, if you can imagine that. The only times that this group leaves this sound is on songs like She Will Be Loved and Secret, which those songs kind of feature more of like a soul/R&B vibe, or at least those kinds of sounds take precedence over the underlying rock influence or rock sound. Speaking of She Will Be Loved, this would be my biggest example of a song that just so happened to make it to radio play, and it's because it's just a genuinely good song that just kind of someone heard it. Again, Maroon 5 was not very well known. I can imagine Maroon 5 was not very well known off of their debut album, but obviously every group wants to get insanely popular, get insanely rich, make a lot of money off their music, but I feel like it takes a lot of time for that to happen. And then just for, I would like to believe that only good songs or songs of good quality would make it off of like an unknown band's debut album in order to make it onto the radio. And I think She Will Be Loved is a good example of that. I would personally consider this song to be timeless. I think a lot of people would agree with me on that. I can't say I hear this song just like out in the wild per se too much anymore, but I mean, this is one of my favorite songs ever, and I don't think it'll really get outdated at any point. This song sounds like Maroon 5 put This song sounds like Maroon 5 put a lot of effort and their own personal style into it, and of course, if you give a song and you give your art that much attention, people are going to respond positively to it. And again, this song is a perfect example of that. And it definitely resulted in enough people liking it to give it mainstream radio play. I can remember when I was a kid hearing this song all over the place. So I'm more talking about now, how it obviously doesn't play much on the radio now. It's the 20-year-old song-ish. But I still remember to this day hearing this song all over the place, hearing it on CDs, hearing it on the radio, hearing it in stores, all over the place. I think that you can even say the same about This Love. I to my memory, I'm trying to like remember when I was going back this far into the discography, I was trying to remember how I heard a lot of this music out in the wild. Because again, I wasn't really listening to music like I do now, where I'm just kind of every like week in, week out, day in, day out, I'm listening to music as much as I can. I only really listened to music when I was like outside in public in the car or at like a store that had the radio playing. So I think as far as I remember, This Love was also played a myriad of times. I'll finish this album, or I'll finish talking about this album by talking very briefly about Adam Levine specifically, since he's obviously the lead vocalist and is really the only, as far as I know, the only member of the band to kind of go out and do other ventures outside of the band. Like, obviously, Adam Levine is on The Voice as a judge. He's featured as a solo artist on multiple different songs, just on multiple different albums by multiple different artists. So he is he's the leader of the band, and I think he's the lead vocalist. So he's, other than the instrumentals themselves, he's the only other thing you hear. So I think he's worth talking about, specifically in terms of this album. And in basically all of these songs on this album, Levine uses his voice and general presence in a way that elevates the song, or at the absolute least just melds into it perfectly. And by that I mean that instead of Adam Levine just kind of being what I would call a vehicle for lyrics, where just kind of you can kind of slap any other person into that role, or you can have really any person sing those lyrics and it wouldn't change the feeling of that song that much. I think in this album specifically, Adam Levine, none of these songs would be the same if anyone other than Adam Levine were singing them. And that's my personal opinion on it. And again, that could just go back to, I've heard these songs sound this way for so long that I couldn't imagine anyone else singing these songs. But I feel like if I was in the same position listening to this way back in 2002 when it first came out, with the same ear that I have now, I would have that same opinion. And honestly, in every single one of these songs, he himself, Adam Levine, not just the lyrics, Adam Levine is just as important as every other part of the song, if not the most important, which is interesting because these songs are all very, I mean, it's an alt rock, it's a pop rock, it's a funk, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to, just for the sake of consistency and simplification, I'm just going to keep referring to them as an alt rock group for the rest of this episode. But again, keep in mind that their genre, they've kind of shifted throughout genres, so I'm just going to keep calling it an alt rock group. But considering that this alt rock group focuses on instrumental a lot in this first album, and in mostly all of their albums, it's a lot to say that Adam Levine is kind of the staple in a lot of the songs, which I'll talk about later, but he is not even close to, I would not hold him to the same regard in Maroon 5's newer music. But again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in short, they were really sticking to themselves and their sound in this album, as you would expect them to. It's their debut album, so you could also make a counter argument if you're going to argue with me on my opinion for this episode. You could also argue that it's their debut album. They don't have a sound until they have their debut album. But my counter argument to that would be the albums following over the next few years also have the same sound. So they definitely had, looking back on it, they still weren't trying to find the sound. They knew what sound they wanted to go with, and they stuck to it, and it shows a lot in this album. It's not a debut album that's just kind of like throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. They knew what they wanted to do, and they ended up making a good album because of it. It is also worth noting that this album has 0 features on it. That's not going to be important now, but it will be important as I continue along with this discussion. So, leaving Songs About Jane, over the next decade, Maroon 5 continued on with, like I said, a sound that's very similar. Jesus, that's very similar to that of Songs About Jane, all while gathering a more widespread audience as they went along. It's actually kind of interesting. I could look up again the exact years, but I believe it was 2007 and 2008 were their next 2 albums after Songs About Jane. So it seemed they had like a I believe in 2004 they had an acoustic version. They released an acoustic version of Songs About Jane, but I'm not going to count that as a actual studio album because, you know, it's just a reworked version of the album they already released. So realistically, they took about a 6-year break before releasing their follow-up album, whose name is leaving me, but it's not important because I'm not going to talk about those two. I am instead going to skip to the years of 2011 and 2012, where we got the albums called Hands All Over and Overexposed, respectively. I'm only going to talk about Overexposed today, one, because I like that album more between the two of them, two, because it has more sentimental value to me, so I feel like I can talk a little bit more about it, and three, the same things can really be said about both albums in terms of my argument. So I think it would be kind of redundant to talk about them both separately, where I'm really just going to be making the same point about the both of them. So, speaking of the argument that I'm going to make in this case, that I'm going to use these two albums for, is that this is their biggest shift towards this kind of pop-centric radio-chasing sound that, in my opinion, will eventually become their downfall. And even more, in my opinion, has already become their downfall. There are, of course, residuals of their past punk alt-rock sound found all over. Again, I'm going to be talking specifically about Overexposed, but it's the same points. So you can find these same sounds all over this album, but they are more tamed and less unique, at least in my opinion. They're kind of, in a way, I don't want to, I guess gentrified might be a incorrect or an accurate/inaccurate way to describe it, but you know, you can still find the sounds that they had in their earlier albums on this album, but it's definitely more, I'll say generic in a way. It's very easy, you know, music has spectrums to it, or at least the way I view music as, there are spectrums to it, and the closer you get to the center of the spectrum, the more people are going to like it, generally speaking. For example, rock, people are going to argue with me on this, and it's fine because I don't know enough about these two genres to really have a fully fleshed out argument that I think this way, but I still do. And I think, for example, rock and metal exist on the same spectrum, but, you know, traditional rock music and is on one end of the spectrum, and then, you know, like heavy metal, screamo, all that is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and the closer you get to the middle of the spectrum, the more people are going to like that music. So that's kind of the argument I'm going to be that's kind of the picture I'm going to be painting here, where Songs About Jane is like on one side of the spectrum for people liking their music or audience acceptance, and then their latest album, which I'll talk about, is on the complete other side, where, well, I shouldn't even say the complete other side, but it's more in the middle, where a lot more people are going to get it, but are going to actually accept the music. But the problem with that is that music that tends to fall in the middle of that spectrum tends to be not as unique and not as enjoyable as music on one end of the spectrum or not. And again, that's kind of just how I view music as a whole. That may or may not have any merit to it, and again, that is kind of used on a case-by-case basis, so that's kind of my cop-out for if any of you guys get mad at me for having that opinion. But again, going back to Overexposed, you know, there are still elements of what made the band popular in the first place, but just at like a toned down level, just to make it more accessible for more people to listen to. Take songs like Daylight or Lucky Strike, for example, which both contain elements that would essentially fast track them to radio while still, you know, having that quote unquote Maroon 5 sound to them. These elements include, at least to me, they include a very cookie cutter generic song structure, easily accessible subject matter. By easily accessible subject matter, I mean just kind of like, you know, you can listen, you know what I'm talking about, those songs that are about some guy or some girl, or some situation that kind of is so generalized that anybody can kind of relate to it, even though the experience that the writer of Maroon 5 is talking about is very different from the one that you're imagining. They kind of frame it that situation in a way where you can still relate to it in some way. And so what I mean by easily accessible subject matter. There's also a predictable build into the chorus, which isn't bad per se, but again, predictability in music kind of leads to a lack of interest or entertainment. So in this case, I'm going to knock it a little bit. And then more songs also feature, and these two songs specifically feature a very easily sing-along singing style. And again, by sing-alongs, or I shouldn't say again, but by sing-along singing style, if you can't think about what I mean by that, I really just mean that the songs are made for, some songs are made, especially this happens in pop music a lot, and again, damn near all the time in radio pop or songs that are made for radio, the structure of the song is made so that you can listen to it, it's catchy, it's like an earworm, it kind of works like an earworm does, where not only can you like remember the lyrics very easily after very few listens, but you can also sing them back as you're listening to it very easily. It's not very hard to like, understand the lyrics and then sing it back, which makes the song easier to kind of play repetitively, because I'll call myself out here. There are songs that I do not like that play on the radio, or that I'll hear like somebody play that I don't like, but they're structured in a way that I end up singing them anyway, even though like even though I don't like the song at all, and I will never put it on myself personally, but I've heard it enough, and the song is so easy to remember and easy to follow that I just end up singing it anyway. That's more what I mean by these two songs. Excuse me. Both these albums objectively cover the potential groove that they have, that the band used to their advantage in some of their early albums, and they kind of covered that groove, or the potential of that groove, in just layers of just cheaper poppy sounds. And I want to make, in this picture I'm building, I want to again paint these two albums, or this era of their music, as the middle ground. So again, it's these layers of kind of pop radio music that I'm referring to aren't the only things found on this album, and especially not on, and maybe not on every single song, but they definitely overwhelm or overpower the better kind of more traditional, quote unquote traditional Maroon 5 sounds. So the sounds are still, those older sounds are still there, most times just in the footprint of the song, or in just like the skeleton of the song, but you don't see the skeleton, you see just everything around the skeleton, which is just covered in just this layers of just poppy sounds, which again isn't bad if it's good music comes out of it, which I do enjoy. A select few of the songs on here, my favorite song on here is One More Night. I just found it very catchy, and I have like this weird like middle school, or maybe high school emotional connection to it for some reason, and that goes for Daylight as well. I hate Lucky Strike, but regardless, this is music that you hear on the radio that you still hear every time you step in your car, but at the same time it isn't just insultingly shoved down your throat everywhere you go. So you know what I mean? Like, you don't hear, there are levels to the way that popular music is played on the quote unquote radio, and again, this is what I would call the middle ground, where you'll hear it out and about, you'll hear it in just public settings, but you won't just have it absolutely shoved down your throat. Like, what's a song I can think of that's shoved down your throat right now? I'm sure as I'm saying this, a lot of you guys can think of songs like this. Again, I don't really listen to just sound like a hipster a little bit, but I don't really listen to mainstream music or mainstream radio that much. So, I can't really pick a song off the top of my head that really follows this formula, but you guys can all tell what I'm talking about. I mean, back in the day, Taylor Swift music is like a perfect example of this. Like, you hear Taylor Swift, well, Maroon 5 music now is a perfect example of this. Like, you just go anywhere and you hear Maroon 5 singing whatever about whatever. You just hear it everywhere. It's like insulting that they just think that somehow you want to hear the song so many times. But yeah. there are still, and like I said, there are still some songs on both these albums where they do fall back heavily into into this groovier kind of sound that I like and that I can easily identify, that a lot of people can easily identify that they use in their older albums. But they're relatively rare, and they are probably not the songs that you would remember from the albums. And I think that's more or less the important part. I think that the songs that, at least I'll speak for myself personally here, the songs that I remember from their older albums are not the popular songs, if there are any. They're really just the songs that are more in tune to what the Maroon 5 sound is or was. But now, in terms of this era of their music, the more recognizable songs are the popular ones, and that's something that they definitely noticed, and that's something that their label definitely noticed, and something that just everyone that worked with them definitely noticed, and it ended up resulting in the album that I would be talking about next. But before I get to that, some more things I want to say about this is that I don't necessarily blame them. I don't necessarily blame them for having this happen. This is just realistically, it's a natural thing to happen in the music industry, where you kind of become like a bigger name. So in order to keep the momentum that you have and to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, you essentially reach this critical point or this tipping point where you're like, all right, well, now I have to start making music for all of these people that have to appeal to all of these people of all these different tastes. So you end up just making super generic music that, will sell to the most people. I don't blame any business for doing a move like that. And I think that's another big difference here, or another big topic here, is the difference between treating music as a business and treating music as an art, right? So I think at the beginning, Maroon 5 was at least seemed that Maroon 5 was treating their music more like art. And at least at this point in 2012, specifically 2011, 2012, they treated their albums kind of in the middle, where they as a band, they wanted to lean very heavily into the artistry, like the actual quality of their art. But at the same time, they also were so big at this point and so popular and so, I guess, reliant on, this is their job now. Like, this is their thing. They have to tour, they have to sell some music, so they also have to pay attention to the business side of it. So running their music as a business, I'm not going to knock them strictly from that, but, it more often than not, it makes the quality of the art suffer. And for that's why we come up with these. That's why I make these episodes, because the art suffers. But, it is worth noting that Overexposed has one feature on it, and, shout it out if you know it, just off the top of your head. But the only feature on Overexposed is Wiz Khalifa, which I'll talk about in a second, and Hands All Over also only has one feature. I'm really only talking about the bass album, not the deluxe album. The deluxe album has, I think, one or two more features, but they're on, reworks of songs, so I'm just not going to count those. And that one feature on Hands All Over is Lady Antebellum. But going back to the Wiz Khalifa feature, I think that calling out this one feature is very important, because there is no reason that Wiz Khalifa should be anywhere near Maroon 5, stylistically, at all. They don't make anywhere close to the same music. And it's not even like they make music that would complement each other, like I always use the example of how like a gangster rapper just kind of pulls in a songstress, like an R&B songstress, to, sing the hook or have a verse or something like that on a song. It's different than that, because in that situation, the two styles complement each other, where it's like this push and pull, and the subject matter might also have that push and pull. They complement each other. But in here, with Wiz Khalifa and Maroon 5, there is no place where they should ever cross paths musically, at least in my opinion. I don't think that Wiz Khalifa could ever make a good song with Maroon 5 and vice versa. I don't personally think that. I don't think that their styles match up well enough, or could complement each other well enough. But again, business, the separation between business and artistry, I completely understand why Wiz Khalifa was on here. 2012 was his kind of peak at the mainstream, at least in my opinion. He had the most. He definitely. I don't think you could argue that point, but I don't think you can argue that he had the most momentum in 2012. I mean, Black and Yellow I think came out in 2010, if I believe, and his first studio album came out in 2011, and I think his second studio album came out in 2012. So he was riding a lot of momentum, and he was definitely garnering a lot of attention in the music world, both in the mainstream and in the rap world. So I don't hate Maroon 5 or Maroon 5's label for wanting Wiz Khalifa on here. It makes sense business wise, but I mean, again, it's not a good song. Or it's not. Payphone isn't a Payphone is the song, by the way, that he's on. It's not an inherently bad song. That's another song that played on the radio a lot. But like, it just. I mean, listen to that song again. Honestly, just please listen to it again. It doesn't. Wiz Khalifa does not seem like he belongs in that song. I don't know if I'm alone on that. I really hope I'm not, because I think it's very egregious how he's just kind of thrown onto that song, but whatever. And the bigger point I want to make with that Wiz Khalifa feature is that before these albums, Maroon 5 kind of rarely sacrificed their entire sound for the sake of sales or for mainstream replays. But, excuse me, need a drink because I'm going to go on this album. But that point brings us to the great year of 2018, when the group released their latest album called Red Pill Blues, which not only is, in my opinion, a terrible name for an album, I think it's insanely corny, but it also makes me immediately think of the Matrix movies. If you've watched the Matrix, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know if there's like an actual relation, if they did that on purpose, or if the Red Pill Blues means something else. I mean, if there's a reference to the Matrix in this album, I didn't hear it. Not that I was necessarily looking for it or wanted to listen to this album too much in depth, but that kind of connection makes me sad. And it makes me sad because this album is just really bad. This album is really bad. It's really bad the way I'm looking at it. It's really bad in the way that it just doesn't sound good. So yeah, no, it's not good. It's bad. It's bad. It's insanely cheap, and it doesn't, in my opinion, just doesn't know what it wants to be, artistically speaking. And okay, so from now on, I'm going to be talking from an artistic point of view, not a business point of view. And if I do start talking from a business standpoint, I will, specify that. But artistically, it just doesn't know what it wants to be at all. It feels like and I'm going to go back to Adam Levine here specifically, because it feels like Adam Levine just phoned in this entire album. And again, I wish I could just play some examples for you guys, but just just pick random songs. It could be the songs that you recognize, it could be like the album cuts that you don't recognize. Just pick any song on this album and just listen to Adam Levine. There is no emotion in his voice whatsoever. There's just like no energy in the entire album. It's insanely formulaic, and it's just pure radio fodder. It is pure radio, just generic ass cookie cutter radio fodder. Like, this is the stuff that no matter what station you go to, no matter how many times you switch the channel on the radio, the Maroon 5 song is playing. It's just full of that. And like, I mentioned the features before because this again is what makes this album, just adds on to the terribleness that is this album. Like, what are the features on here? I mean, Cardi B. Okay, Cardi B. Again, okay, so this is gonna be business. Cardi B is the biggest star at the time, so I mean, fine. I guess throw her on the album, whatever. That's fine. But like A$AP Rocky, Future, like. Okay, listen, Kendrick Lamar is on this album. Why? Why is Kendrick Lamar on a Maroon 5 album that is full of radio fodder? If you were to tell me, I guess, that Kendrick wanted to try leaning into pop music, like pop rap music, then maybe I could see that move. But like, Kendrick is not that rapper. Like, I could more see Drake on a Maroon 5 album than Kendrick Lamar, just because I feel like Kendrick Lamar has so much artistic excuse me, just has so much artistic integrity as a rapper that he just wouldn't do something like this. So having him on an album of this just terrible quality just kind of erodes my opinion on Kendrick Lamar a little bit. I really hope he got like an insanely massive bag for giving his feature up. Because in my opinion, he's a godlike artist. Like, he's one of the greatest rappers ever. One of the greatest rap artists of all time, both in talent and catalog. Like, he doesn't need to do this. He's gonna sell a crap ton of records no matter who he features on. He could just not, excuse my chair. He could do no features ever. He's like superstar level. He's superstar level. He does not need to be on an album like this at all. It's infuriating as a rap fan, as a hip hop fan, to see one of the most highly regarded artists in that genre just be kind of kicked down to the level of just shitty, run of the mill pop music. It's just annoying. It's annoying. And honestly, that's not even the biggest. I mean, objectively, it's probably my biggest problem with the features here. But like, subjectively, my biggest feature problem is SZA. Why did they waste an entire SZA feature on this bullshit? Honestly, I remember I was not inherently excited to listen to this album, and I think that song with SZA came out as a single anyway. I feel like I'm pretty sure that song came out as a single, the one with SZA. And I remember y'all listeners know I'm a massive, just monumental SZA fan. Go listen to Control by SZA. Your weekly reminder to go listen to the album. But massive SZA fan. I'm like, all right, I know SZA kills. Hope maybe she could save this song. Maybe she could pull Adam Levine and the rest of Maroon 5 up by their, by their hair up to her level of artistry, and then just scrap together a good song, right? That was my hope, and that was my expectation. And that was not the result. This song is bad just like the rest of them. And I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and blame SZA for that. I'm going to 100% blame Maroon 5 and the label for that. But, we barely get any SZA music, so anytime you waste a SZA feature, I'm gonna get mad at you. I'm looking at you, DJ Khaled. And I'll get to DJ Khaled soon enough, but I'll save that energy for that episode. But back to the album as a whole, like this, I mean, I feel like I'm just gonna end up saying the same things about the reasons I hate this album, but it's because they're just so egregious. It's because I hate them so much. This album is just full of songs just falling into one of two categories. They're either just absolutely forgettable trash, or songs that you hear playing in Target that you don't even realize is Maroon 5. And that's kind of my biggest, and that really is probably my biggest problem with this album. Maroon 5 has zero identity in it. This is not a Maroon 5 album. This is a collection of like made for radio songs that were just super formulaic, like, all right, like put the hook here, put the subject matter here, you know what I mean? Just very made specifically to play on the radio. And then just Maroon 5 got paid to put their name next to it. That's what it feels like to me as a listener. And again, I said this, it has no personality. It has no personality. And you can tell that they know that it has no personality, because that's the only reason that you need to fill an album with so many features, because you know that the album would have no personality without them. And the features don't even do anything to assist in the personality of the album, because they're not the right features. They're just, it's like they just wrote a bunch of names of popular artists at the time, threw them in a hat, and just picked out 8 of them and said, all right, somehow 3 of them were SZA, Kendrick Lamar, and A$AP Rocky and Future. But like you could have put better artists on here. You could have put so many other artists on here that could have made it slightly better. And it's not like you don't have the money for it, because you have some of the biggest names in the music industry on this album. Again, Kendrick Lamar had to have gotten paid a massive amount of money. Future needed to get paid a massive amount of money. Rocky probably needed to get a good bit. I mean, SZA probably got a good bit. There are some other features on here that I guess I can just look them up real quick. I didn't feel like knowing them too much. Julian Michaels, not too familiar with. Lunch Money Lewis, not super familiar with. He's another rapper. But, I mean, like, they had money to put into good artists. I don't know why they just didn't. You could have gotten Taylor Swift, probably. I would have been more understanding if you scrapped 4 out of the 6 features on this album. 7 features on this album, excuse me. Just to get one Taylor Swift one. I feel like that would have... And I'm just throwing Taylor Swift's name out there. It's just... I don't even know if Taylor Swift would really sound good on a Maroon 5 song. She probably would. She probably would sound fine. But that's my point. It would sound better than what they have here. You know, astronomically better than what they have here. But whatever. And again, like, just going back to it, this is why people like Kendrick Lamar on here, because these songs are nothing without just raw star power. Which is why, and I mean, this level of star power just kind of, unfortunately, makes just a lazy album, because they knew that they could just fuel it with star power, and of course the artistry suffer. The art suffers for it. Excuse me. Like, none of these songs, they're not good at all. None of these songs. I'm sorry if you like some of them. If you think they're good, they're not. I hate to break it to you, they're not good songs. None of them. Well, okay, I shouldn't say exactly that. The songs "Best for You" and "Plastic Rose" actually have a good sound, a pretty decent to good sound about them. But I mean, like, on "Best for You," even the songs that are better, they just get drowned out in everything that's bad about the rest of the album. Like, Adam Levine on "Best for You" just has, like, negative emotion, like, just zero emotion on the entire album. It just sounds phoned in. It's lazy. It's insanely lazy. And the song should be relatively semi-emotional. I mean, it's not like, you know, like a crying. It's not an insanely deep song, but, like, it should at least have, the song merits some sort of emotion throughout it. It just doesn't. And Plastic Rose sounds like a cheap Kate Renata ripoff. I don't even know. I mean, I really hope that Kate Renata had some sort of contribution to the song, because it sounds exactly like a Kate Renata song, just way worse. Yeah, no, of course he's not on here, but whatever. God, this album's really bad. Sounds get really bad. This album is a great example of what happens when an artist or group gets too comfortable with how big of stars they are, while simultaneously being so big that they feel the need to appeal to the masses more than a specific demo. This is like a perfect example of the worst of those two situations, just, you know, Demolition Derby crashing into one another and just creating a terrible ass product in red blue pills. Ugh. And the sad part is I don't even expect them to stop acting like this with their next albums. If you listen to my last podcast, I talked very briefly about their latest single, which I'm going to assume is part of their rollout for an upcoming album that they have coming out at some point. And I disliked it for essentially the same reasons. It's just radio fodder that I just don't care about, and that nobody should ever care about. You could delete this entire album and the music industry would not change at all. In fact, it might get a slight bit better. I'll just go as far to say that. It's a shame. I'll finish this by saying that it's just a massive shame that a band that started off, in my opinion, so strong and so unique, to just become like another nameless act whose music will just be endlessly shoved down your throat every time you step out of the damn house and then put your ear next to a speaker of any sort. Yeah, so that'll conclude this installment of the Hate Train. I think this was more of a tame episode in terms of in terms of the critique, but I did kind of pop off on Nicki Minaj on the first episode of the on the first installment of the Hate Train, so I figured that I might as well just kind of do like a softball episode for one today, and I think Maroon 5 was a good one to investigate. In terms of new music I'm looking forward to tonight, again, it's Thursday, so on Thursdays I like to just kind of shout out new music that you should check out tonight. And personally, there isn't really any music that was announced that I'm looking forward to per se, but there's a rumor of a possible Future and Lil Uzi Vert joint project that I'll check out because I'm interested to see what the hell that sounds like. And then there's also a new ASAP Ferg song with Nicki Minaj and Made in Tayo that I'll give it an honest try. But other than that, it's probably gonna be a slow weekend for music. Which, I mean, we were kind of due for. We've kind of been going full steam ahead for a few weeks now, so I guess we're due for a little bit of a break. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. I've been Nick Hope, and this has been The Bittersweet Taste. I will see you all on Monday.